China is the world's second largest economy and a technological powerhouse. Yet it is more autocratic today than at any point since Mao. One man has undone 40 years of collective leadership, abolished term limits, and placed himself at the center of power like an emperor of old. Xi Jinping has merged the ancient structures of imperial rule with modern surveillance and totalitarian tools. How did a leader underestimated by his peers transform China into a state ruled entirely by his will? This is the story of the restoration. Chapter 1. The Prince Who Fell. Xi Jinping was born on June 15, 1953, into the inner circle of China's communist elite. His father, Xi Jinping, was a rising party leader, a man of influence and revolutionary pedigree. For a child, this promised privilege and opportunity, yet Xi's early years would be defined not by comfort, but by upheaval. At the age of 15, the Cultural Revolution struck. His father was purged, branded a traitor, and Xi was sent to the remote village of Liangjiahe in Shanxi province. For 7 years, he lived in a cave, performing grueling manual labor, enduring hunger, isolation, and humiliation. He witnessed firsthand the chaos unleashed when ideology became a weapon. Families were torn apart, neighbors turned against each other, and children were incited to denounce their parents. These years shaped Xi's understanding of power. He saw that unchecked mass movements could destroy society and that authority must be controlled. Unlike other princelings who navigated shortcuts through their family connections, Xi returned in 1979, determined to rise through the party ranks on his own merits. He learned patience, observation, and discipline, skills that would later allow him to outmaneuver rivals. By the time he ascended to General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party in 2012, few took him seriously. He appeared to be a compromise candidate, quiet, understated, even weak. That would be their fatal mistake. Behind his calm demeanor, Xi had forged a strategy born of exile, hardship, and careful observation. The question was no longer who he was, but how he would wield power when the time came. Xi Jinping had survived the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, but the true test of his life was only beginning. What followed would transform China in ways the world had never seen and set the stage for an emperor in the modern age. Chapter 2. The Anti-Corruption Purge. When Xi Jinping became General Secretary in 2012, China was stable on the surface. But beneath the veneer of order, rivalries simmered, and power was fragmented. Many party officials doubted Xi's strength. They assumed he would maintain the status quo, a compromise leader who would avoid rocking the boat. They underestimated him, and that miscalculation would prove fatal. In 2013, Xi launched what appeared to be an ambitious anti-corruption campaign. The official narrative promised to clean up the party and restore public trust. Millions of officials faced scrutiny, and the media highlighted cases of bribery and abuse. On the surface, it was reform. Beneath it, the campaign had a far more strategic objective: eliminating potential rivals and consolidating absolute control. Over 1.5 million party members were investigated, and more than 400 high-ranking officials, often referred to as tigers, were brought down. Key targets included Bo Xilai, a charismatic rival, Zhou Yongkang, a security chief with vast influence, and even prominent military leaders. The methods were both innovative and brutal. Shuanggui, the party's extrajudicial detention system, allowed Xi to remove opponents quietly and efficiently. Many were forced to confess publicly, their names broadcast across state media, creating a chilling warning to anyone considering defiance. Television broadcasts of confessions, party-led trials, and disciplinary measures made it impossible for rivals to regroup. The fear was pervasive. By 2017, no official dared to challenge Xi openly, and the party hierarchy had been reshaped to answer entirely to him. This purge was not reform. It was a classical political consolidation in the tradition of China's emperors. Like Zhu Yuanzhang, the Ming Dynasty founder who eliminated potential threats among his generals and advisors, Xi systematically removed anyone who could contest his authority. What made it modern was its scale and efficiency. By using the party's legal structures, propaganda, and surveillance, he created a system where dissent could not survive. Through this campaign, Xi established the foundation for absolute power. The lessons of the Cultural Revolution were clear in his strategy: control society, neutralize rivals, and shape loyalty through fear and visibility. No one in the party could ignore the consequences of opposition. Xi was no longer a compromised candidate underestimated by his peers. He was the central authority, unchallenged and prepared to wield power in ways that combined ancient imperial strategy with modern statecraft. The anti-corruption purge was more than a campaign. It was a declaration. Xi Jinping had signaled to the party and the nation that a new era had begun. He was consolidating power with precision, turning the instruments of governance into tools of loyalty. The question was no longer whether he could rule, but how far he would go to remake China in his image. Chapter 3: The Emperor's Toolkit. By 2018, Xi Jinping had reshaped the Chinese Communist Party into an instrument entirely loyal to him. The next step was to remove structural constraints that could limit his authority. In a historic session of the National People's Congress, term limits on the presidency were abolished, with 2,958 delegates voting in favor and only 2 opposing. This was more than a procedural change. It was a declaration that Xi would not be bound by precedent or convention. The stage was set for an emperor in all but name. Alongside this consolidation, Xi elevated his ideology into the constitution itself. Xi Jinping thought appeared alongside Mao's writings, a codified framework for governance and loyalty. Portraits of Xi appeared in schools, offices, and public spaces. Propaganda films depicted him as a guiding father figure, while children sang songs celebrating Uncle Xi. The cultivation of a personality cult was meticulous, deliberate, and pervasive. It was not chaos. It was carefully engineered devotion, merging ancient autocracy with modern symbolism. Xi's modernization of control went beyond symbolism. He deployed artificial intelligence, facial recognition systems, and the social credit system to monitor behavior and enforce loyalty across society. Xinjiang became a testing ground for his surveillance state, with over 1 million Uyghurs detained in what the government justified as counterterrorism measures. In Hong Kong, protests in 2019 were crushed under the national security law, demonstrating that even semi-autonomous regions were now fully subject to central authority. Taiwan faced unprecedented military pressure, signaling that dissent could not be tolerated anywhere under Xi's vision. This combination of ancient and modern tools was unprecedented. Imperial China relied on examinations, bureaucratic hierarchy, and local informants to maintain control. Xi added satellite surveillance, algorithms, and social incentives to create a system that is simultaneously traditional and technologically advanced. The emperor's toolkit was complete: ideological indoctrination, structural purges, surveillance, and the capacity for rapid, uncompromising enforcement. Yet this toolkit also revealed Xi's ambition. He was not content with maintaining authority. He sought total control, civilizational restoration, and global influence. Each mechanism, from surveillance cameras to constitutional amendments, served the dual purpose of securing absolute loyalty and projecting power beyond China's borders. The emperor was building a state capable of enforcing obedience with surgical precision. By merging the lessons of history with 21st century technology, Xi Jinping created a system that is both ancient in logic and unprecedented in execution. The world had seen authoritarian rulers before, but never one who combined the centralized vision of a Ming Dynasty emperor with the tools of a modern technocracy. The question now was whether such a meticulously controlled empire could maintain itself without fracturing under its own weight. Chapter 4. The Chinese Dream. Xi Jinping's vision for China extends far beyond politics or power. He calls it the Chinese Dream, a concept that frames his rule as the restoration of China's rightful place in the world. This narrative draws on centuries of history, positioning Xi as the latest in a 2,000-year line of emperors tasked with reversing humiliation from the Opium Wars, the Japanese invasion, and the century of national weakness. It is both ideological and practical, shaping domestic policy, foreign relations, and the structure of the party itself. Central to this vision is the Belt and Road Initiative, Xi's modern tribute system. Ports, railways, and energy projects stretch from Africa to Central Asia, binding other nations economically and politically to China. Smaller countries dependent on China's infrastructure become, in essence, vassals in a modern imperial network. This is globalization, but one directed entirely by Beijing's hand. The initiative projects influence without war, but with clear expectations of loyalty and alignment to Xi's vision. Domestically, Xi wields ideology and nationalism as tools of unity. Wolf warrior diplomacy exemplifies a new assertiveness, where diplomats confront criticism aggressively and without apology, signaling China's unwillingness to accept subordinate status. The Chinese Dream frames every policy, from economic development to cultural campaigns, as a continuation of the civilizational mission Xi claims to uphold. By presenting his authority as a restoration rather than a personal aggrandizement, Xi intertwines legitimacy with history itself. The two centenary goals illustrate his long-term ambitions. By 2021, China would achieve a moderately prosperous society, a milestone marking domestic stability. By 2049, the centennial of the People's Republic, China is intended to be a dominant global power, politically, militarily, and culturally. Each initiative, each policy, is a step toward this grand vision, reinforcing both national pride and loyalty to Xi. Citizens are persuaded that supporting him is not merely obedience to a leader, but participation in the resurgence of an entire civilization. Yet beneath the grandeur, the Chinese Dream carries inherent tension. Ambition at this scale requires obedience and conformity. Innovation, dissent, and local initiative are tolerated only to the extent they serve the centralized vision. The global projection of power, combined with strict domestic control, creates a system with extraordinary capability but limited flexibility. Xi's restoration of imperial structures is complete, yet it exists in a world that demands adaptability. Through the Chinese Dream, Xi has positioned himself not only as a political leader, but as the embodiment of China's civilizational revival. His ambition is national, cultural, and global, yet it is inseparable from the absolute consolidation of personal power. The emperor's vision is clear, but the machinery to achieve it leaves China vulnerable to the very forces of history that have undone dynasties for centuries. The question remains, can this carefully constructed system withstand the pressures of the modern world, or will it collapse under its own weight? Chapter 5. The Emperor's Trap. Xi Jinping's consolidation of power has created a system of almost unimaginable control. Yet absolute authority comes with hidden dangers. By removing term limits, purging rivals, and building a surveillance state, Xi has made himself indispensable. Every decision, every policy flows from his will, but a system designed around one man carries inherent fragility. Without a succession plan or checks on his power, the empire he has rebuilt depends entirely on Xi's ability to govern flawlessly. A single misstep could destabilize not only his rule, but the nation itself. Economic pressures expose this vulnerability. China's growth is slowing. The property sector is in crisis. Youth unemployment exceeds 20%, and demographic shifts threaten the labor force for decades to come. Xi's rigid, top-down control makes adaptation slow and risky. Policies that require innovation, risk-taking, or local initiative often falter, constrained by layers of oversight and fear. The very mechanisms that ensure loyalty also inhibit flexibility, creating a paradox where power ensures stability in theory, but fragility in practice. The zero-COVID policy exemplified this rigidity. The nation's economy, social cohesion, and global reputation suffered under strict, centralized enforcement. Xi's insistence on control amplified the consequences of mistakes. Similarly, Taiwan presents a dilemma. Retreat would signal weakness, yet a full-scale invasion risks catastrophic conflict. The emperor's choices are bound by history, geography, and expectation. Unlike ancient emperors who ruled over agrarian societies with slow-moving economies, Xi commands a dynamic, interconnected, and technologically advanced nation where delays and miscalculations can have global consequences. Historically, every Chinese dynasty eventually becomes rigid, unable to adjust to changing circumstances. Emperors who over-centralized power, ignored succession, or misread their environment faced collapse. Xi has mirrored these patterns with a modern twist, combining the concentration of the Ming dynasty with digital surveillance and ideological indoctrination. His system is efficient, imposing, and nearly omnipotent, but perfection is required for survival. Any failure risks systemic unraveling. Internationally, Xi's ambition brings further tension. The Belt and Road Initiative binds countries economically, but also creates obligations and expectations. Wolf warrior diplomacy signals that China will defend its interests aggressively. Missteps could alienate allies, provoke sanctions, or escalate regional conflicts. Domestically, high expectations for national rejuvenation intensify pressure. The public perceives Xi's authority as intertwined with China's destiny. Failure, therefore, is not just personal, it is civilizational. In constructing this system, Xi has achieved what no leader since Mao has: unrivaled power in a modern, globalized economy. Yet the very design that makes him omnipotent also sows the seeds of vulnerability. Absolute power depends on absolute performance, and the stakes are enormous. Every decision is magnified, every miscalculation amplified. Xi has made himself both emperor and linchpin, and history offers a haunting lesson. When the emperor falters, the empire may falter with him. Xi Jinping has created a machine of control, loyalty, and obedience. But the question that shadows his reign is unavoidable. Can an empire built for perfection survive in a world defined by unpredictability? The emperor is secure, but the system he commands may not be. When Xi eventually fails, whether through economics, international crisis, or internal unrest, the consequences will reverberate far beyond Beijing. The trap of absolute power is now set, and China's future hangs in delicate balance. Conclusion: the modern emperor. Xi Jinping has achieved what no Chinese leader has managed in decades. He has reversed 40 years of collective leadership, merged ancient imperial authority with 21st century surveillance, and built a state entirely dependent on his will. He is both the architect and guardian of a system that demands perfection, yet the pressures of a dynamic economy, demographic decline, and global tensions make perfection impossible. China today is a nation of extraordinary power and extraordinary fragility. Xi has made himself indispensable, but in doing so, he has created a paradox. The empire cannot function without him, and his rule cannot endure without flawless execution. Every policy, every initiative, and every decision carries the weight of history and the fate of a civilization. In this modern restoration, the emperor reigns supreme, but the question remains, when Xi eventually falters, what will become of the empire he has painstakingly reconstructed? The future of China hangs on the delicate balance between absolute control and the unpredictable forces of history.